talking about comfort feedings today, how they work, and the benefit they hold for hospice patients and their caregivers. You're listening to Heartbeat from the Heart of Hospice. I'm Jerry Finter, here with Helen Bauer.
Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, we're here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care. Because we know how busy life can get, Heartbeat is designed to give you helpful information in a bite-sized format.
Everyone working in end-of-life care should be knowledgeable about medical aid in dying. We would recommend cultural anthropologist Anita Hanig's book, The Day I Die, The Untold Story of Assisted Dying in America. The book is unbiased, based on 5 years of immersive research. In telling the stories of ordinary Americans who decide to seek medical assistance in dying, Ms. Hanig uncovers the stigma against assisted dying and why someone might choose an assisted death. You can find The Day I Die, The Untold Story of Assisted Dying in America at anitahanig.com. Today's episode is sponsored by the Love Always Project. The team at Love Always understands that while loss is a natural part of life, it's a topic that a lot of people would rather just not think about. On the Love Always Project website, you'll find support related to grief, loss, and bereavement, as well as funeral pre-planning. With all the overwhelm that comes with the loss of someone you love, it's great to have the resources the Love Always Project provides. Check out their website at lovealwaysproject.org.
Okay, I'm in charge of this episode.
You absolutely are.
I am. And do you know why? Because we're going to talk about eating, which is one of my favorite things. And even better than that, we're going to talk about eating what you want to eat.
You know, I have to say that one of the things I look forward to is one of these days being able to eat whatever I want.
Exactly. Okay, so here's the question. Here's our discussion to start with. If you were dying, if the doctor told you were dying, what 3 foods would you want to eat?
Oh, that's easy. That's easy. Ice cream.
Okay.
Chocolate ice cream.
Really?
And strawberry ice cream.
You would limit it that way? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's kind of old school. I would go with Oreos. I would go with creme brulee and bread pudding with whiskey sauce.
Ooh, wow. Yeah, yours is definitely much better than mine. But,
right.
I like ice cream.
And if I wasn't already dying, I would probably be horribly sick from eating that. But man, so we are talking about eating what you like at end-of-life care.
Otherwise known as comfort feedings, or can also be called pleasure feedings.
So what is a comfort feeding, or the practice of comfort feeding? It's the practice of feeding a patient only what is desired by the patient, only what they consider palatable.
Right. Something that they consider pleasurable.
Right.
So that really is going to depend on the person. I mean,
right.
You and I both had different desires when it came to what pleasure feedings we might want. And it's the same way with a patient. Each patient, they're going to want something that they want.
Right. It might not be considered healthy.
Generally, it's probably not going to be considered healthy.
However, it contributes greatly to quality of life, which is what hospice is all about.
Exactly. I think that's probably good news for most patients at this point.
I think there's some advantages to this. I think there's some challenges that come with it, right? That the caregiver and the patient have to work through. It hopefully reduces friction between the caregiver and the patient. Caregivers are sort of the gatekeepers when it comes to food. Restricting salt, restricting fat, restricting sugars, spicy foods, things like that. And the patient, who is a lot of times resistant to those diet restrictions, they push back on it.
Sure, with good reason. They don't want all that savory stuff necessarily, or the healthy stuff.
Right. Maybe they want potato chips and, ooh, that sounds good.
Yeah, we might want to add that to your list.
Add that to my list. But it only contains textures and consistencies and flavors that the patient likes, and hopefully they are able to swallow.
Yeah, that's a big consideration as well, is whether or not they can swallow what they want to eat. Now, I know this is going to sound gross, but I have known patients who wanted certain foods they couldn't swallow. They would take the food into their mouth, chew it, taste it, and spit it out.
Sure. I have had patients that have done that before, either because they didn't have enough saliva production or they had impaired swallowing, head and neck cancer patients, things like that. I have seen that happen. I've also seen patients that wanted the taste of wine or whiskey, a cocktail, and they would just take a spoonful of it and put it into the patient's mouth. The patient couldn't necessarily swallow, but they would maybe have the taste of it. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So it doesn't have to be balanced nutritionally. That's fine. It doesn't have to be 3 meals a day, not breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It doesn't have to be like that. It can contain sweets. It might contain carbs. It's all about what the patient might crave. And today they might want mashed potatoes for breakfast. That sounds awesome, doesn't it? Mashed potatoes for breakfast. But let's talk about from the medical, the clinical part of it, right? Because, that's my background. So this can affect diseases, diagnoses. So say heart disease, congestive heart failure, you're looking at salt intake. Diabetes, you're looking at the sugar intake. It can affect those things. So I've had families and patients, usually the families that were exasperated with a patient that would only eat these certain things. Should we do this? Should I allow this patient to do this? Should I let my loved one just eat pudding if that's all they want? And this is what I told people. I always recommended that a patient not eat in a way that makes their symptoms worse.
Right, because that does affect quality of life too.
Absolutely. And it affects the caregiver as well because they have to manage more tasks. Are they going to monitor blood sugars? Are they going to end up having to give the patient more Lasix because the patient has edema that's gotten worse or shortness of breath that's gotten worse? So that was always my answer. Don't do anything that's going to make your symptoms worse. The other thing is don't do anything that's going to increase the worry of your caregiver.
Yes, that's true.
Right? And managing those additional symptoms or having to watch their loved one suffer with exacerbated symptoms increases the worry and the grief burden of the caregiver. The Love Always Project is a grassroots movement created to encourage people to pre-plan and pay for their funeral as the ultimate act of love for those they will leave behind. Many people don't know they can plan their funeral in advance, but most people who do know they can pre-plan simply choose not to act on the opportunity. The Love Always Project knows there are benefits to completing funeral pre-planning, such as minimizing pain for your loved ones during what can be a difficult time of grief and mourning, and leaving a final connection with those you love that can mean so much. By promoting discussion about end-of-life issues and providing expert information, Love Always helps people design a better farewell. Funeral pre-planning and funding can reduce financial and emotional stress on your loved ones, giving them time to grieve and giving you peace of mind knowing your wishes will be carried out. Follow the Love Always Project on Facebook and Instagram, and check out the Love Always Project forum page to find a space to share and learn about the many aspects of end-of-life issues. Visit lovealwaysproject.org to find the support and resources for funeral pre-planning you need. Now on to today's episode.
So let's talk about some of the effects on the caregiver. And here in just a moment, we'll also talk about the effects on the patient. But let's start with the caregiver first. So when comfort feedings or pleasure feedings are part of the plan of care, so to speak, then it does have some effects on the caregiver. It's going to be a change in some of the previous habits that they've had.
Right.
It also, in some ways, might feel like to the caregiver that the patient is giving up.
Right. Because we've been taught if you eat in a healthy way, if you eat a balanced diet or restricted according to what your symptoms are, your diseases are, you're going to live longer. You're going to feel better. You're going to thrive. And of course, eating is always such a sign of hope and of thriving. It's very difficult to make those big changes that are steps towards the very end of life.
Right. Well, it's a change of mindset.
Yes.
It's almost like a paradigm change. We've always believed that we should eat healthy.
Sure.
And then these pleasure feedings are obviously not always going to be considered healthy. So there's this mind shift that has to take place for the caregiver, and that can be difficult for a caregiver to just immediately change the way that they view the kind of food that the patient is eating.
Right, especially when they've become familiar with salt restrictions or whatever restriction, and then all of a sudden all that's thrown out the door and they have to figure out a completely different diet on the whim of the patient, because what a patient might crave today is not what they're going to want tomorrow necessarily.
Right. So there is an advantage to this, though, if the caregiver will consider it this way, and that is you don't have to worry about monitoring what the patient is eating.
Right.
So you can kind of just ease up on, all of the healthy foods and just give them the foods that they like to eat.
Yeah. You just kind of have to relax your grip on that particular piece.
Right. So it takes away some of the caregiving burden is what it does.
Yes. So let's talk about the effects on the patient.
Okay.
It allows for eating your favorite foods.
Gotta love that.
And we're so entrenched in these foods. It promotes feelings of pleasure. And one of the things that it does for a lot of people is memory recall. The snickerdoodle cookies.
Oh, yeah.
That your grandmother made.
Yeah, that's right.
Or for me, my mom used to make cooked pudding. She would cook pudding and we would eat it hot.
Oh, yeah.
And the memories of that, because my mom did that when we were kids, the memories that are associated with food are very strong. So it's a little bit of, maybe a little bit of a life review through food.
That's an interesting thought. I had not considered that.
I kind of like that.
That is good, yeah. So it also promotes feelings of autonomy.
Tell me how so with a patient.
Well, they're getting to eat food that they want. They get to make the choice themselves.
They get to make the choices. So there's some give and take between the patient and the caregiver and the hospice team as well. Any healthcare providers, you have to respect the patient's choice to refuse whatever types of food and to request certain foods. And that is all about recognizing their autonomy, their right to choose things, and the right to have quality of life.
Exactly. And so from the perspective of the hospice team, the providers, we who are the hospice providers need to also encourage and give some guidance when it comes to pleasure feedings. Again, you gave some really good instruction earlier. Don't eat those things that will make symptoms worse.
Right.
So it's going to take away the quality of life when that happens. And so as a team, we can give some guidance in those respects. But we also need to have the same mindset too, that this is their choice. They get to choose these things. The patient gets to choose. The unit of care gets to choose. We're there to provide guidance and consultation for these matters.
Thanks for listening to Heartbeat from the Heart of Hospice. I'm Helen Bauer with Jerry Finter. Because we know your hospice journey is 24/7, you can always find us at theheartofhospice.com. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening, and please take a minute to leave a rating or review on Apple Podcasts.
To connect with us, you can send us an email to host@theheartofhospice.com. You can also find us on social media. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.